People care through their lens, not yours. One of the hardest truths you'll ever accept is that people don't actually see your problems the way you see them. They see them through their own lens, through their emotions, their priorities, their exhaustion, their comfort. It's not that people are cold or heartless, it's that their world doesn't stop spinning just because yours is shaking. Everyone is carrying something, and that something shapes how they listen to you. When you tell someone, "I'm struggling," you want them to understand the depth of that pain, to see what's really happening inside you. But what they often hear is filtered through their own fatigue, their own fears, their own need to protect their peace. You could be opening your soul, but they're hearing noise through the static of their own life. That's not rejection, that's reality. We all live inside our own heads more than anyone else's. Every person has their own running dialogue, their own mental storm. So when you speak your pain out loud, it's colliding with 1,000 invisible walls in someone else's mind. You want empathy, but what you're often met with is detachment, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to carry both their weight and yours at the same time. And that's where the disappointment starts to grow. You tell your story expecting relief, but instead you feel emptier. You think, they don't understand me. But maybe it's not that they don't want to understand. Maybe they can't. Maybe they've never been where you are. Maybe their heart is already too full of their own battles. You have to realize people interpret pain based on experience. If someone's never been through loss, they can't fully grasp yours. If they've never fought anxiety, they can't feel what you feel when your chest tightens and your thoughts spiral. They can sympathize, but they can't experience it for you. And if you rely too much on others to feel it with you, you'll start confusing attention for healing. You might start to resent people for moving on quickly, for not checking in, for not remembering what you said. But that resentment only makes you more bitter and less free. Because the truth is, no one will ever care about your peace as much as you should. That's your job. That's your responsibility. Think about it. The last time someone shared their problem with you, how long did it stay on your mind? A few minutes, maybe an hour, and then you went back to your own life. That's what everyone does. It's not evil, it's human. We all filter information through what matters most to us, and that's why depending on people for emotional rescue never works long term. You can lean on others, yes, you can share, vent, connect, but you can't expect anyone to be as invested in fixing your pain as you are. When you do, you start living disappointed. You start measuring love by how much someone reacts to your problems instead of how much they respect your boundaries. That's why some people seem so indifferent. It's not that they're cold, it's that they're already drowning. Maybe they're smiling through their own chaos. Maybe they're pretending they're fine while breaking apart inside. When you throw your pain at them, sometimes it just bounces back because they don't have room to hold it. So what do you do with that? You stop making your healing dependent on other people's reactions. You stop waiting for them to care enough to make you feel better. You stop expecting them to feel what you feel. Instead, you start learning to see life through your lens, not theirs. You start understanding that empathy isn't ownership. No one owes you emotional labor, and you don't owe anyone your entire story. You start saving your words for people who've proven they can hold them with care. The ones who listen not to reply, but to understand. The ones who don't shrink away when your voice shakes. Those people are rare, and they deserve to be chosen, not chased. And when you understand that most people care through their own filter, something inside you shifts. You stop taking their silence personally. You stop begging for validation. You stop over-explaining your pain just to be heard, because now you get it. Their reaction isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their bandwidth. The truth is, you can't control how deeply people care, but you can control how deeply you depend on it. You can stop handing over your peace in exchange for temporary comfort. You can choose to speak with awareness, not out of desperation. When you do, your words carry more weight, your presence becomes calmer, and your energy no longer depends on who's listening. Because when you realize that people care through their own lens, not yours, you stop expecting them to feel your pain, and you start learning to manage it yourself. You stop seeking mirrors in other people, and start becoming one for yourself. And that's where the shift happens. When you stop chasing understanding from others and start creating understanding within yourself. Venting isn't healing. You ever notice how sometimes, after you've let everything out, after you vented, cried, ranted to a friend, or posted that emotional paragraph online, you feel a little lighter for a moment, but then a few hours later, it all comes rushing back. That's because venting isn't healing, it's release, not repair. It's the emotional version of opening a pressure valve. The steam goes out, but the fire underneath is still burning. We've been taught that talking about our problems is the key to feeling better. And yes, expression matters. You should never bottle up everything you feel. But here's the part no one tells you. If all you ever do is talk, you're not healing, you're looping. You're reliving the same emotion over and over again, and every time you do, you carve the memory deeper into your mind. It starts to own space in your identity. You start to become your pain instead of releasing it. The reason venting feels so satisfying is because it tricks your brain into thinking you've done something productive. You release emotion, you get validation, and for a moment, you feel understood. But then nothing actually changes. You're still in the same situation, thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same weight. Because venting doesn't move you forward, it just helps you tolerate staying where you are. And sometimes, that's why we stay stuck. Because we confuse being heard with being healed. We think if someone listens long enough, we'll feel whole again. But healing doesn't come from someone saying, "I understand." It comes from you saying, "I'm ready to do something about this." The moment you start turning your emotion into action, that's when things start to shift. But most people stop right before that step. They vent to feel better, not to get better. They dump their stress on anyone willing to listen, friends, coworkers, family, and they mistake emotional release for growth. And over time, that habit doesn't free you, it drains you. It makes you dependent on other people's reactions just to feel calm. You start needing an audience for your pain instead of creating progress from it. You can tell when venting has become a cycle. It's when your conversations start to sound the same. You keep repeating the same story, using the same words, feeling the same anger, but nothing's changing in your reality. You're living in the echo of your own complaints. And the worst part, people around you start to tune out. They don't mean to, but humans naturally detach from repetitive pain they can't fix. So now you're not only stuck in your problem, you're feeling unheard, unseen, and misunderstood all over again. But what if venting was only the first step, not the finish line? What if instead of using it to dump everything, you used it to discover something? Every time you talk about what's wrong, you get a glimpse into what needs to be done. The key is to stop after that glimpse and ask yourself, okay, now what can I do with this? Because that's the bridge between emotion and evolution. Healing begins when you stop venting just to release emotion and start using emotion to reveal direction. When you say, "I'm hurt," the next question should be, what do I need to change to stop getting hurt this way? When you say, "I'm frustrated," ask, what boundary have I been avoiding? When you say, "I'm tired," ask, what am I giving energy to that doesn't deserve it? That's what growth sounds like. And that's also what maturity feels like when you stop running to every conversation as an escape hatch and instead you face yourself. Because sometimes the real healing happens when you sit in silence after the venting is over, when you stop talking and start thinking, when you stop releasing emotion and start listening to what that emotion is trying to teach you. It's not about silence or isolation. It's about purpose. You can talk about what hurts, but the goal isn't to make others feel your pain. The goal is to make yourself understand why it's there. Otherwise, you'll keep talking about the same problem year after year and calling it processing. But you're not processing, you're procrastinating. You're avoiding the work that healing demands. Venting can be healthy in doses. It can help you clarify what's really bothering you. But it only helps if it leads somewhere. Think about this: when you break a bone, you don't just talk about how much it hurts. You go get it fixed. You let the doctor set it straight so it can heal properly. Emotional wounds aren't any different. If you keep reopening them through endless venting, you never give them a chance to close. You don't have to silence your pain, but you do have to guide it. Give it a purpose. Channel it into something that builds you, not drains you. That might mean journaling instead of texting someone at 2 a.m. It might mean working out instead of complaining about being unmotivated. It might mean finally having that hard conversation you've been avoiding instead of just talking about it over and over. Every time you choose action over venting, you teach your mind something powerful: that you are not helpless, that your emotions don't own you, that your story doesn't have to repeat just because your feelings do. Healing is when the story changes, and the story only changes when you stop talking about what's wrong and start building what's right. Because venting isn't healing. It's the sound you make before you decide to heal. Oversharing weakens your voice. You ever notice how the more you talk about something that hurts you, the less power your words start to carry over time? At first, it feels like relief. You share your story, you let it out, and for a moment it feels like you've reclaimed control. But the truth is, every time you repeat the same pain to a new audience, you're actually giving a piece of your power away. Oversharing doesn't make you more understood, it makes your emotions more diluted. We live in a world that glorifies openness, that tells you, speak your truth, be vulnerable, share your story. And that's not wrong. Vulnerability is powerful, but not when it becomes performance. When you start sharing everything with everyone, you lose control over how your story is handled. Not everyone who listens is safe. Not everyone who nods their head actually cares. And the more you share, the easier it becomes for others to define your pain for you. There's a fine line between expression and exposure. Expression helps you heal. Exposure just leaves you raw. When you tell everyone about what you're going through, it stops feeling sacred. Your pain becomes content. Your story becomes conversation material. And without realizing it, you start living for reactions instead of reflection. You start measuring your worth by how many people respond with sympathy instead of how deeply you're processing within yourself. When you share your struggles too often, people start to tune out. It's not that they hate you, it's that repetition numbs empathy. The human brain is wired to protect itself from overload. So if you keep bringing up the same pain, the same problem, the same wound, eventually it stops being a story people listen to and starts being background noise. And that silence you feel from others after that, it hurts more than the pain you were talking about in the first place. Sometimes you think, I just need to explain it better. But the more you explain, the less impact your words have. Because truth isn't proven by repetition, it's proven by change. People don't start believing you when you keep talking about your pain. They start believing you when they see how you handle it. Your growth speaks louder than your grief. Your composure screams louder than your complaints. Oversharing doesn't make you weak, but it does make you exposed. And exposure makes you vulnerable to misunderstanding. When you give everyone access to your emotions, you give everyone permission to interpret them. One person might feel compassion, another might feel pity, and someone else might use it against you when it suits them. You can't control how people hold your story once you hand it to them. That's why your emotions deserve discretion. Not secrecy, just protection. Some of the strongest people in the world are the ones who learned how to process privately. They still share, but they choose wisely. They don't perform their pain to prove they're real. They move quietly because they've learned that silence carries power. When you talk less, your words start to mean more. When you stop announcing every struggle, you start surprising people with your strength. And here's the thing, oversharing isn't always intentional. Sometimes it's a cry for connection. You feel alone, so you talk. You tell your story hoping someone will finally understand it. But what you often get back is surface-level sympathy, quick words, quick comfort, and then silence. And that silence feels like abandonment, so you share again, you tell more people, you go deeper, louder, rawer. But what you're chasing isn't attention, it's belonging. You just want someone to say, I get it. But true belonging doesn't come from broadcasting pain. It comes from being known deeply by a few, not shallowly by many. It's not about how many people hear you. It's about how many people truly see you. Oversharing spreads your emotions thin. It's like shouting into the wind and hoping it echoes back as understanding, but it never does. And when you start to overshare, you also lose your mystery. You give away parts of yourself that should have been kept for your own reflection. Not everything you go through is meant to be turned into a conversation. Some things are meant to be worked through quietly so that when you do speak about them, it's from a place of wisdom, not from a wound still bleeding. The moment you stop oversharing, your voice starts to regain weight. People start to listen again, not because you've gone silent, but because your silence has purpose. You're no longer speaking from chaos, you're speaking from clarity. That difference changes everything. You no longer need to convince people that your pain matters. You carry yourself in a way that shows it does. There's power in mystery. There's peace in restraint. When you stop narrating every emotion you feel, you give yourself the chance to understand it before anyone else does. And that's where control returns. When you're the first to interpret your feelings, not the last to explain them. Oversharing weakens your voice because it replaces depth with noise. It teaches people that your emotions are always available, always open for commentary. But your emotions are not public property. They're not entertainment. They're not stories for people to casually consume. They're the most personal part of you, the place where your strength grows quietly without applause. So before you speak, ask yourself, am I sharing this to heal, or am I sharing this to be heard? One leads to peace. The other just leads to exhaustion. Because when your words come from a place of pain, they echo. But when they come from a place of peace, they land. And people can feel the difference. Choose listeners, don't chase them. Not everyone deserves access to your story. That's something most people learn the hard way. You start talking, hoping someone will understand, and then you realize you just gave a piece of your heart to someone who didn't know what to do with it. They listened for a moment, nodded, maybe even gave you advice you didn't ask for, but deep down you felt unseen. You walked away feeling lighter for a second, and then heavier than before. Because it's not just about being heard, it's about being heard by the right people. You have to understand, there's a difference between someone who listens to respond and someone who listens to understand. Most people are waiting for their turn to talk. You can tell by their eyes they're not with you, they're somewhere in their own mind, rehearsing what they'll say next, and that's fine. It's human, but those aren't the people you pour your soul into, because every time you share deeply with someone who doesn't know how to hold it, your trust cracks a little more. The truth is, not everyone has the emotional capacity to handle your truth. Some people mean well but are not equipped for your depth. Others pretend to care because they enjoy the drama of someone else's pain. And some simply listen out of habit, not compassion. If you don't learn to tell the difference, you'll keep giving your peace away to people who don't know how to protect it. Choosing your listeners is not about being closed off, it's about being careful. You have every right to protect your emotional space. Not everyone should have a front row seat to your life. Some people belong in the audience, others don't even deserve a ticket. You can be kind and still keep your boundaries strong. You can be open without being exposed. You can tell your story without turning it into public property. When you chase listeners, you start performing. You start changing the tone of your truth to make it more comfortable, more acceptable, more digestible for others. You downplay your pain, you sugarcoat your anger, you reshape your honesty to avoid judgment. But every time you do that, you betray yourself a little bit more. You teach yourself that your real voice is too much. You teach your heart that it must earn understanding instead of simply deserving it. The right listeners don't make you shrink. They make space for your words. They don't rush to fix you or minimize what you're feeling. They sit with it. They ask, "What do you need?" instead of "What's wrong with you?" Those people are rare, and that's why they're valuable. They're not loud, but they're present. They're not always overflowing with advice, but they're safe. When you find someone like that, you'll notice you don't have to explain yourself as much. They get it, even in your silence. But before you can find the right listeners, you have to stop chasing the wrong ones. You have to stop throwing your story into every open ear, hoping one of them will finally echo back understanding. Because when you do that, you're operating from desperation, not discernment. You're not looking for connection, you're looking for validation. And validation built on desperation is temporary. It fades as soon as the conversation ends. Learn to listen to how people listen to you. When you talk, do they interrupt? Do they change the subject? Do they minimize what you feel by saying, "It could be worse"? Or do they hold space for your pain without trying to compete with it? That's how you find out who deserves your honesty. That's how you separate those who are curious about your story from those who care about your healing. And sometimes, the people you expect to listen won't. Family, friends, partners, not everyone you love will have the capacity to meet you where you are. That doesn't make them bad people. It just means they're not the right audience for this chapter of your story. Don't force understanding from people who haven't lived the kind of silence you've had to survive. Some people will only ever see you through the lens of their own limits. Choosing listeners also means accepting that some stories are not meant to be told yet. Some emotions are still too raw to be shared. Not every pain needs a witness. Some need time. Some need quiet. You can be in the middle of a storm and still choose not to announce it to the world. That isn't weakness, that's wisdom. Because when you speak before you've processed, you risk letting confusion guide your words instead of clarity. There's a calm that comes when you stop chasing people to listen and start choosing people who actually care. You stop begging for attention and start valuing connection. You stop proving your pain and start protecting it. The moment you realize that not everyone deserves access to your emotional world, you take back control of it. You become selective, not guarded, but wise. And the funny thing is, when you stop chasing listeners, the right ones show up. The ones who see your silence as strength, not distance. The ones who don't need every detail to know that you're struggling. The ones who check in, not out. You start realizing that understanding doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be real. Because when you finally choose your listeners, you stop performing and start connecting. You stop shouting just to be heard and start speaking to be understood. And that's when your words start to matter again, not because of how many people hear them, but because of who truly does. Convert pain into power. There's a moment in every person's life when pain stops being something that happens to you and starts becoming something that grows you. That shift, that quiet, invisible change is the point where your pain turns into power. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen because you force it. It happens when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" Because pain, as unfair as it feels, is a teacher disguised as punishment. It breaks you down to show you where you were weak, and it forces you to rebuild with strength you didn't know you had. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control what it produces inside you. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every betrayal, they all hold energy. The question is, what are you doing with it? Most people let pain drain them. They carry it like weight on their shoulders, talk about it, replay it, and let it shape their identity. But a few people, the ones who rise above, learn to redirect that same energy. They use it as fuel. They let the fire burn, but they make sure it burns for a reason. Pain can destroy you or develop you. The difference is direction. When you sit in it without purpose, it eats you alive. But when you decide that the pain will not define you, that it will refine you, everything changes. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of life and start becoming a student of it. You start asking better questions. You stop saying, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Because every hard thing you've gone through has a message hidden inside it, and it's waiting for you to stop complaining long enough to listen. When you convert pain into power, you stop bleeding energy through resentment. You start collecting it through awareness. Every scar you have becomes a symbol of survival, not suffering. That betrayal that broke you, it taught you what trust should really look like. That failure that embarrassed you, it taught you where you needed discipline. That heartbreak that crushed you, it taught you what love should never feel like again. Pain leaves behind lessons, and those lessons become the blueprint for your strength. The most dangerous thing pain can do is make you believe it's permanent. It tricks you into thinking that the way you feel now is how you'll always feel. But the truth is, pain doesn't last, it transforms. The only question is whether it transforms you or consumes you. And the only way it transforms you is if you start moving with it, not against it. You take that anger, that frustration, that loneliness, and you turn it into something productive. You channel it, you build something out of it. That's how you win. When you turn pain into purpose, your focus changes. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop giving pain permission to paralyze you. You start realizing that your greatest growth doesn't come from your comfort, it comes from your discomfort. Think about it. The moments that made you strong weren't easy. They were the nights you didn't sleep, the mornings you didn't want to get up, the times you wanted to quit but didn't. Those moments are proof that pain doesn't just hurt you, it builds you. You can't control the storm, but you can control the sail. You can choose to let pain make you bitter or let it make you better. You can choose to sit in anger or rise in acceptance. You can choose to talk about what broke you or build something new from the pieces. When you stop feeding the pain with your attention and start feeding your growth with your discipline, something inside you hardens, not in a cold way, but in a grounded way. You become unshakable. And it's not about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's not about being emotionless or numb. It's about refusing to let it own you. You acknowledge it, you feel it, and then you use it. That's real strength. People think strength is not crying. Strength is crying, understanding why you're crying, and then doing something with that understanding. Strength is saying, this hurt me, but it won't define me. Pain has energy. That energy can destroy your peace or build your purpose. If you don't direct it, it directs you. Every thought, every emotion, every memory, it's power waiting to be placed somewhere. Some people place it in bitterness. Others place it in growth. You decide which one you'll be. You start working out not because you hate yourself, because you need an outlet for everything you've been holding in. You start journaling not to complain, but to track your transformation. You start setting boundaries not out of anger, but out of self-respect. That's what it means to convert pain into power. You take what hurt you and use it as evidence of how much stronger you're becoming. The world doesn't reward pain, but it respects resilience. When people see that you've been through storms and still show up calm, still show up kind, still show up disciplined, that's power. That's not something you can fake. That's the kind of power you earn through endurance. Pain teaches you how to stand still in chaos, how to breathe when it's hard, how to focus when it hurts. So when you start feeling broken, remind yourself, this feeling isn't an ending, it's a beginning. You're being rebuilt. Pain is life's way of stripping away what's not meant for you, so what's left is what's real. And that's what power truly is, not loud, not flashy, but quiet, steady, and unshakable. Because when you finally learn to convert pain into power, you stop fearing it. You stop running from it. You start using it. You don't need an audience to heal. We live in a world where everyone wants to be seen, where every thought, every emotion, every experience gets turned into a post, a caption, or a story. But healing doesn't work like that. Healing isn't a performance. It's not meant to be witnessed or validated. It's meant to be lived quietly, privately, in moments no one else ever sees. You don't need an audience to heal. You just need honesty with yourself. Because the truth is, the most powerful transformations happen when no one's watching. There's this idea people chase, that if others see your progress, it means it's real. That if people acknowledge your growth, it must be valuable. But that's not growth, that's performance. Real growth doesn't need applause. Real healing doesn't need eyes on it. It's slow, uncomfortable, and often invisible. It's you, late at night, facing the parts of yourself you've avoided for years. It's you realizing that closure doesn't come from someone else's apology, it comes from your acceptance. Healing happens in silence because silence gives you space to hear yourself. When there's no noise, no validation, no feedback, you finally start listening to the thoughts you've been drowning out. And what you hear might not be pretty. You'll hear your insecurities, your fears, your regrets, your guilt. But that's where healing begins, not when you run from those voices, but when you face them without needing anyone else to translate them for you. You don't need to explain your pain to the world for it to matter. You don't have to post quotes about your growth or tell everyone that you're healing. Because true healing isn't about proving progress. It's about feeling peace. It's about waking up one day and realizing the things that used to trigger you no longer have the same power. It's about realizing that you can breathe through what once suffocated you. That's not something the world can see. That's something only you can feel. The reason so many people never fully heal is because they keep performing their healing. They keep seeking validation for it. They want people to notice they've changed. They want recognition for surviving. But healing doesn't need witnesses, it needs commitment. It doesn't need you to announce it, it needs you to live it. The quiet work you do on yourself when no one's paying attention, that's the work that lasts. When you stop needing an audience, you stop rushing your process. You stop comparing your healing timeline to someone else's highlight reel. You stop thinking, they've moved on faster than me, or I should be over this by now. Healing has no schedule. It's not linear. Some days you'll feel powerful, and other days you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. But that's how real change works. It's messy, repetitive, and deeply personal. You're not falling behind, you're unfolding, and when you stop broadcasting your pain, you start protecting it. You give it space to breathe. You let it evolve naturally instead of forcing it to look perfect. Sometimes silence is the most healing sound there is. When you're quiet, you're not pretending you're fine, you're processing. You're sorting through what's real and what's reaction. You're finally letting yourself feel without needing to be seen. That's not weakness. That's strength in its most authentic form. Healing in private also teaches you independence. You stop leaning on constant reassurance. You stop waiting for people to check in or ask if you're okay, because you realize you are okay. Maybe not perfect, maybe not finished, but okay in a way that doesn't rely on anyone else's attention. That's freedom. When your peace stops depending on how much other people notice you, you finally start owning your life. It's easy to confuse silence with loneliness, but they're not the same. Loneliness is craving company, silence is choosing solitude. In solitude, you reconnect with yourself. You remember who you were before the pain. You start to recognize your own strength again. You realize that the version of you that made it through everything you thought you couldn't, that version doesn't need an audience. It just needs acknowledgement from you. When you heal privately, your life begins to speak for itself. People won't see your breakdowns, but they'll see your calm. They won't see your sleepless nights, but they'll feel your grounded energy. They won't see the tears, but they'll notice the peace in your eyes. You won't have to explain the transformation. You'll embody it. And that's the kind of healing that can't be faked. There's power in being unseen, because when no one's watching, you stop performing and start being honest. You cry when you need to, not when it's convenient. You rest without guilt. You forgive without needing to announce it. You start learning that growth isn't about proving you've changed. It's about becoming so stable that you no longer need to prove anything at all. The beauty of healing without an audience is that you reclaim your privacy, your energy, and your peace. You stop being a story for others to consume. You stop seeking empathy as proof of progress. Instead, you create peace that no one can take away. The world doesn't need to see your process to validate it. You don't need applause to confirm your evolution. You just need presence. The courage to sit in your silence and trust that you're rebuilding something stronger within yourself. Healing doesn't need to be shared to be real. The quiet victories, the mornings you get out of bed when you didn't want to, the moments you choose calm instead of chaos, the times you forgive instead of retaliate, those are the real markers of transformation. You don't need a witness for them to count. They count because you lived them. They count because they changed you. The power of silence and self-ownership. At the end of it all, the truth is simple. No one is coming to save you, and no one is obligated to understand you. People might listen, some might care for a while, but the responsibility to heal, grow, and rise again has always been yours. And that's not a tragedy, that's freedom. Because once you stop expecting the world to carry your pain, you realize how powerful you really are when you decide to carry it yourself. Stop chasing validation. Stop rehearsing your hurt for an audience that will scroll past it in seconds. Stop telling your story hoping someone will make it make sense. You don't need the world to feel sorry for you. You need to start respecting yourself enough to do something about what's hurting you. The people who move forward in life aren't the ones who complain the loudest. They're the ones who learn quietly, rebuild privately, and return stronger. They understand that healing isn't about being seen, it's about being stable. It's about being at peace even when no one knows what it took to get there. So, if you're in that place right now, tired, unheard, emotionally exhausted, let this be your reminder you don't need to explain your pain to be valid. You don't need to tell your story to prove it's real. Your silence can be sacred, your growth can be unseen, because real healing isn't something you talk about, it's something you live. When you finally stop telling everyone your problems and start listening to your own strength, you discover that the person you were waiting to understand you was you all along. That's where the real power begins.